The restaurant smelled like truffle butter and quiet money, that kind of perfume only old wealth can afford. I shouldn't have been there. But something about the night felt like a test I didn't know I'd been invited to. The waiter looked nervous when I walked in, his bow tie too tight, his voice caught between politeness and pity. He glanced toward the biggest table by the window, 12 seats, candles flickering, laughter spilling like wine. My family. They didn't see me at first, or maybe they did and just didn't want to. My sister was laughing at something my father said. My brother-in-law poured champagne like he was auditioning for a commercial. Everything looked perfect, framed in gold and glass and the faint hum of a piano. I stood there, hands in my pockets, waiting for anyone to wave me over. No one did. Finally, I walked closer. "Didn't know there was a dinner tonight," I said, forcing a smile. My father looked up. The smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, we thought you were busy." I said quietly, "but not anymore." He cleared his throat, adjusted his cufflinks. "Well, this table's for family." The waiter froze beside me, not sure where to look. My sister leaned closer to my cousin, whispering behind her glass. "Right," I said, the words heavier than they sounded. "Family." I turned to the waiter. "It's fine. I'll find my own table." As I walked away, I caught my reflection in the mirror, the outsider in a place that used to feel like home. But what they didn't see was the folded reservation slip in my hand. I'd booked a table too, right across from theirs. I sat down, opened the menu, and smiled. "They said this table's for family," I murmured. "Then I'll show them what family really costs." I used to think family was forever, that no matter what happened, there would always be a seat for me, a place where I didn't have to earn belonging. I was wrong. When I was a kid, dinners were loud, the kind of chaos that only love can make. My mother would hum while stirring soup. My father would tease her for overcooking the rice, and my sister would roll her eyes so hard I thought they'd stick that way forever. We didn't have much, but somehow the house always smelled like warmth, like onions frying in butter, like safety. The table wasn't big scratched, uneven, one leg shorter than the others, but it was ours, eh? Every chair had a story. The one with the squeaky armrest was mine. The one with the chipped edge belonged to Mom. And Dad sat at the head, always in charge, always certain. He used to say, "In this house, we eat together. That's what keeps us strong." And for a long time, I believed that. When I graduated college, I was the first in the family to wear a cap and gown. Dad stood in the audience, proud and stiff, his arms crossed. Mom cried. After the ceremony, she hugged me like she was holding the whole world. "You made us proud," she whispered. I remember thinking, finally, I belonged. I landed a job at an architecture firm downtown, nothing glamorous, just a start. I sent part of my paycheck home every month. They didn't ask, but I wanted to. I thought that's what family did, we shared. Whenever I visited, Mom would cook my favorite dish, caramelized pork with boiled eggs. Dad would sit across from me, asking about work in that tone halfway between interest and interrogation. He wasn't cruel, just distant. Like affection had a price tag he wasn't ready to pay. Then, slowly, things started to shift. It was small things at first, conversations that ended too early, invitations that never arrived, laughter that dimmed when I entered the room. My brother-in-law joked one night, "You still designing buildings you can't afford to live in?" Everyone laughed. I smiled too. That's what you do when you love people who don't see you. Mom changed the subject. She always did. She had a way of smoothing the edges of discomfort. But after she passed, no one filled that role. Her death was like pulling the tablecloth off too fast. Everything wobbled, some things broke, and nothing felt stable again. After the funeral, The calls stopped. The texts became rare, mechanical. Hope you're okay. Busy week. We should catch up sometime. We never did. I'd scroll through social media, seeing them at parties, dinners, weddings, smiling, always smiling. And I'd wonder when my invitation got lost. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Family is complicated. Right, everyone grows apart. But it did matter, because when you're excluded by the people who built you, it doesn't just hurt, it erases you. There was one night I'll never forget. It was the last dinner I had with all of them before the silence began. We sat in a fancy restaurant downtown, my treat. I'd just gotten a small promotion, and I wanted to celebrate. Mom wore a red dress, glowing. Dad complained about the parking. My sister kept checking her phone. Halfway through the meal, Dad said, "You're doing well. Huh. Must be nice living by yourself. No family to worry about." I laughed awkwardly. "You are my family." He smirked. "Sure, but you know what I mean. Freedom." Something about the way he said it stuck with me, like family was a burden I had escaped, not something I was part of. A year later, when I lost my job, I didn't tell them. Pride is a strange thing. You want to appear strong for the very people who made you feel small. I spent weeks searching for work, eating instant noodles, counting coins at the grocery store. When rent was due, I sold my gaming console, a gift from my mother. No one called. But life has a way of recycling irony. I found a better job. Smaller firm, quieter office, but it paid more and gave me space to breathe. I built a little life, one without noise, one that didn't depend on their approval. Still, when birthdays came, I'd send gifts. When Dad had surgery, I covered part of the bill. When my sister's kids started school, I sent a check. No one thanked me, but that's not why I did it. I did it because I still believed, somewhere deep down, that family meant something. Until that night at the restaurant. I didn't know they'd be there. Didn't know they'd booked the same place. Didn't know I'd have to stand there, heart in my throat, while my own blood looked at me like a stranger interrupting their meal. It's funny when betrayal comes from the outside. You can fight it, but when it comes from your own, you just stand there, bleeding quietly. The waiter that night, I'll never forget his face. The discomfort in his eyes when he said, "Sorry, sir, this table is for family." He didn't mean to hurt me. He was just following the rules. But in that single sentence, every unspoken thing became real. I wasn't family anymore. I was just someone who didn't fit the table. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. Didn't cry. I just walked to my own table, the one I'd accidentally reserved without realizing it would sit directly across from theirs. The universe has a sense of humor. It gave me a front row seat to my own exile. I watched them laugh, clink glasses, toast to things I was no longer part of. The waiter refilled my water in silence. He looked sorry. I gave him a small smile to make it easier. When dessert came, I didn't touch it. I was too busy memorizing the moment. Because deep down, something in me shifted, something cold and clean and irreversible. I wasn't going to ask for a seat anymore. I was going to build a new table, and this time, they were the ones who wouldn't be invited. "You can be part of a family your whole life," I whispered that night, "and still be treated like a guest." It didn't happen all at once. Family never breaks with a bang, it fades with excuses. At first, it was small. My sister stopped answering calls, claiming the baby kept her up all night. My brother-in-law forgot to include me in the annual barbecue. My father said he was too tired for visitors. Little omissions, harmless on their own, deadly when stacked together. I kept reaching out anyway, because that's what love does. It keeps knocking, even when no one answers. Months after my mother's death, I drove to their house unannounced. I brought flowers for her old room and a bottle of wine. The gate was locked. When I rang, my sister opened it halfway. surprise flickering across her face like she'd seen a ghost. "Oh, you should have called," she said, voice tight. "I didn't think I needed an appointment," I replied. She hesitated, stepped aside reluctantly. The house looked smaller, colder, like her warmth had died with Mom. Dad was watching TV, volume high. He didn't look up when I entered. "Hey," I said quietly. "You came," he replied flatly, eyes still on the screen. It was strange hearing someone sound disappointed that you showed up. We ate in silence. The room was filled with all the words we didn't say. Halfway through dinner, my sister said, "So, how's work?" I told her I was freelancing doing small architectural projects for local shops. "Freelancing," Dad interrupted, eyes narrowing. "So, unemployed." The air thickened. "No," I said calmly. "It's project-based. Independent work." He scoffed. "Independent is what people say when no one wants to hire them." I froze, the fork halfway to my mouth. My sister tried to laugh it off. "Dad, what I'm just saying, he had a good job. Should have stayed put." I forced a smile. "You mean the one that laid me off?" He didn't answer, just kept eating, satisfied with the silence that followed. That was the night I realized to him, my worth ended when my paycheck did. After that, I stopped visiting, but distance doesn't numb everything. Some pains echo. They still invited me to big events out of obligation, not affection, weddings, birthdays, holiday dinners. I'd show up, sit at the edge of the table, laugh at jokes I didn't understand, and leave before dessert. People always said, "At least you still have family." But what good is family if you always have to prove you deserve them? 2 years later, I finally rebuilt my life. A small firm in the city hired me as a design consultant. Better pay, better peace. I was doing fine until Dad called one evening. I almost didn't answer. "Hello, I need your help," he said, skipping any greeting. "With what, your sister's birthday? We're planning something nice." "That's great. I was thinking you could cover the restaurant deposit." It took me a moment. "You want me to pay? You're doing well now." "Right. Besides, it's for family." That word again, family, like a currency they only used when it benefited them. I sent the money, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted peace. The dinner was fancy, a rooftop venue overlooking the city. When I arrived, everyone was dressed like it was a gala. My sister greeted me with a brief hug, camera ready but cold. "Glad you could make it," she said, like she was checking a box. Dad raised a glass. "To family," he said. Everyone echoed it, except me. Because when I looked around, all I saw were people who loved the idea of family, not the responsibility of it. Later that night, while paying the final bill, I overheard my brother-in-law say, "He's useful, at least picks up the checks." They all laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. That was the first fracture that didn't heal. Months later, I was invited to another family dinner. They'd booked a high-end restaurant, not the same one as the night that would come later, but similar. When I arrived, my name wasn't on the reservation list. "Are you sure?" I asked the hostess. "Yes," she said politely. The party of 10 already seated didn't mention an 11th guest. My stomach sank. I walked to the table anyway. There they were laughing, eating, living. My sister's husband spotted me and whispered something. She turned, her smile stiff. "Oh, you made it," she said. "Was I not supposed to?" I asked. Dad sighed audibly. "We didn't think you'd come. It's kind of last minute. You sent me an invite. That was more of a courtesy." Courtesy. That word stung more than any insult. I sat for 10 minutes before standing up. No one tried to stop me. When I paid for my drink, The waiter asked. Leaving so soon? I nodded. They already have what they need. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of cheap whiskey. The city lights blurred outside my window. And I thought about Mom, about how she'd never let this happen. She used to tell me, family isn't who you share blood with, it's who shares their table with you. I didn't realize how literal that would become. By the time the family dinner that changed everything came around, the one with the $200 bill, I already knew what to expect. I didn't go there for their approval anymore. I went there for closure. When they told me, this table is for family, I didn't feel anger. I felt recognition, confirmation. The truth had finally said itself out loud. That's when I decided if they wanted to define family by cost, I'd pay in full. Not to hurt them, but to free myself. Because love, like debt, only ends when it's settled. Blood doesn't always bind, I whispered that night. Sometimes it blinds. The night they said the words, it was raining. The kind of soft, lazy rain that makes the city glow wet streets, reflecting neon lights and expensive shoes. The restaurant was alive with noise, silverware clinking, laughter bouncing off marble walls, the smell of steak and wine thick in the air. I was early, old habit. I hate being late, it feels like disrespect, but maybe respect doesn't mean much when you're invisible. The hostess smiled when she saw my name. Ah, yes, the Hale Reservation, Table 12. I followed her through the maze of tables, passing businessmen, couples, and quiet families taking pictures of their food. And then I saw them. My family. The Hale Reservation, except my name wasn't part of it. They were already seated laughing, glasses raised, plates steaming. Dad was in the middle, commanding the room like always. My sister leaned in close to her husband, whispering something that made her smirk. For a second, I thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe there was another seat waiting. But as I approached, no one moved. Not a single chair shifted. Hey, I said, forcing casualness. Didn't know everyone was coming out tonight. My sister blinked, her face stiffening for half a heartbeat before she smiled too bright, too fake. Oh, you're here. Dad set his glass down. His tone was measured, polite, public. We thought you were busy. I shrugged. I was free tonight. A beat of silence. Well, my brother-in-law said, laughing awkwardly, this table's already set. Maybe next time. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were effortless. The waiter standing nearby looked uncomfortable. He turned to me, apologetic. I'm sorry, sir. This table is for family. That sentence should have meant nothing, but it meant everything. The restaurant noise dulled into a low hum. The clinking of glasses faded. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady and heavy, like the tick of a clock that had just stopped caring. I nodded slowly, the way you do when something inside you breaks, but you don't want the world to see it. Of course, I said softly, family. The waiter stepped back, unsure what to do. My sister looked down at her napkin. Dad raised his glass again, not to toast, but to move on. I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. When I sat at my own table, the one I'd reserved earlier that day, without knowing it'd sit right across from theirs, I felt like a ghost at my own funeral. From my seat, I could see everything. The way my father laughed too loudly. The way my sister avoided looking in my direction. The way the waiter hesitated each time he passed by, caught between two versions of truth. Their table was bright, golden, alive. Mine was dim, silent, empty. But for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to belong. I was watching. The waiter came over hesitantly. Would you like to order? Sir, I nodded, eyes still fixed on them. Yes, the house special, and a glass of whatever they're drinking. He paused, uncertain. The same bottle. Exactly the same. He brought it over. The same wine, the same brand, but somehow it tasted different. Not bitter, not sweet, just real. From across the room, I caught snippets of their laughter. You should have seen his face. He's too sensitive, always the outsider. Each word landed like raindrops, soft but cold, the kind that soak through your skin slowly. At some point, the waiter returned with the bill for my table. Will you be paying now, sir? I looked up at him, and something inside me shifted, a decision forming quietly. No, I said, not yet. He nodded and walked away, leaving me with my thoughts. The mirror behind the bar caught my reflection calm, straight-backed, almost regal. For once, I didn't look like the boy trying to earn a seat. I looked like the man who had finally stopped asking. By dessert, they were laughing harder. My father was retelling some story from his youth, voice booming, eyes glinting. It was the same story he used to tell me when I was small, about how he built everything from nothing, how family was loyalty. The irony almost made me laugh. I watched as the waiter brought them the final check. My brother-in-law reached for his card, waving it like a flag. Got it covered. Of course he did. Pride runs deep when you think you've already won. But pride without gratitude is just arrogance in a tuxedo. When I stood to leave, the waiter turned to me. Everything all right, sir? I smiled faintly. Perfect. Thank you. He nodded, still uneasy. You're welcome to stay longer. No need, I said, slipping my jacket on. I've already seen everything I came to see. I left a generous tip not for the service, but for the discomfort. Sometimes kindness is just a quieter kind of revenge. Outside, the rain had slowed. The air smelled like rain-soaked earth and car exhaust, the scent of endings. I stood there for a while, watching the lights reflect in puddles, trying to feel something. But all I felt was calm, like grief had finally burned itself out, leaving only ash. I didn't know it then, but that night wasn't just the moment I stopped being part of them. It was the night I started being whole again. That night, I whispered to the rain. I didn't eat. I made plans. A week passed before I went back to that restaurant. The rain had stopped, but the city still smelled like wet concrete and regret. I walked past the same glowing windows, past the same piano melody leaking through the glass, past the same golden sign that read family dining, reservations recommended. It was a Saturday night, their favorite night. The Hale family always went out on Saturdays. I didn't even have to call ahead to know they'd be there. But this time, I wasn't coming as the son who waited for an invitation. I was coming as the man who made his own. The hostess recognized me instantly. "Good evening, Mr. Hale," she said with a polite smile. "Same table." I smiled faintly. "No, I'll take the one right next to it." She blinked, confused, but nodded. "Of course. And will you be dining alone again?" "Yes," I said, "but not for long." When I sat down, I could see them perfectly. Same laughter, same toasts, same empty warmth. Dad wore his usual suit, navy blue, crisp. My sister was dressed like a magazine cover. They were halfway through dinner, the table glittering with wine glasses and false affection. The waiter, the same one from last time, spotted me. He froze for a split second before approaching. "Back again, sir." "Yes," I said calmly. "I'd like to pay in advance tonight." "For your meal?" "No." I looked up, meeting his eyes for theirs. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder toward the family table. I'm sorry, sir. Do you mean?" "Yes. The Hale table. 12 guests. 1 check." He blinked, speechless. That's quite a bill. I'm aware. But may I ask why? I smiled, not unkindly. Because sometimes the best way to teach value is to pay for what others take for granted. The waiter hesitated again, but I could see the moment curiosity turned into respect. He nodded. Understood. I'll handle it personally. Good, I said, handing him my card. And when the bill arrives, please include a note. What should it say? I wrote it down on a napkin, folded it, and slid it across the table. Don't open it, just deliver it when the time comes. For the next hour, I stayed not watching, not eavesdropping, just existing. Their laughter carried across the room, louder than it needed to be. Dad was bragging about some new contract. My sister complained about the maid. It was the same script, the same hollow performance. But this time, I wasn't in the audience. I was the author. Eventually, the moment arrived. Their plates cleared, their glasses empty. Dad raised his hand for the check, a gesture that always made him look like a man who owned the room. The waiter nodded, disappeared, and then returned with a single black folder. He placed it on the table. Compliments of another guest, sir. Another guest, my father asked, already annoyed. Who? The waiter simply gestured toward me. All 12 heads turned. The noise died instantly. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even raise my glass. The waiter opened the folder, revealing the receipt and the note. Dad read it first. His jaw tightened, his face drained of color. My sister leaned over, squinting. Then she covered her mouth. The table fell silent. On that simple, folded napkin, in clean handwriting, were the words, "This one's on me. After all, I'm not family, just the one who paid for it." It was quiet enough to hear the clink of a spoon on porcelain somewhere across the room, the kind of silence that hurts because everyone's pretending it doesn't. My father tried to speak, but his voice caught. My sister muttered something about it being unnecessary. My brother-in-law laughed nervously, whispering, "He's being dramatic." But there was no recovering from it. You can't unsee truth once it's written down. The waiter, unsure whether to leave or stay, stood frozen beside the table. Dad finally looked at him. "Return the money," he said. The waiter shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. The payment's already cleared." "Then bring me the manager." "He's aware, sir. In fact, he asked me to tell you something." "What?" The waiter hesitated, then said softly, "He said to tell you, we don't get customers like him often." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true. For years, I'd paid with silence, with loyalty, with dignity. Tonight, I paid with money, and somehow, it cost less. They didn't eat dessert that night. No more laughter, no more toasts. They sat in silence while the waiter cleared their plates one by one, each clink of porcelain a small funeral for pride. I stood, left a second tip double the first, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the air was cold but clean. The city lights shimmered in puddles like constellations rearranged just for me. As I waited for my cab, I glanced through the glass window one last time. Dad was still sitting there, staring at the note. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. The same man who once said, "We eat together, that's what keeps us strong," was now sitting alone at the head of a table full of shame. When the cab arrived, the driver asked, "Good night, sir." I looked back at the restaurant, smiled faintly. "Best one in years." The next morning, the restaurant posted a short message on their social media. Last night, a guest quietly paid the entire bill for a family who refused him a seat. No names, no drama, just dignity. Within hours, it spread. People commented, shared, debated. Some called it revenge, some called it art. I called it closure. Because in the end, I didn't need them to understand. I just needed them to remember. Later that evening, my sister texted me for the first time in months. "That was cruel." I replied, "No, that was polite." She never responded. And my father, he didn't call. But a week later, a letter arrived, a short, handwritten note. "You made your point. I hope it was worth it." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my mother's old mug. "It was," I whispered. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It signs the receipt and walks away. Sometimes, I said to the empty room that night, revenge isn't loud. It's printed on paper and it balances perfectly. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight leaking through the blinds. It felt too bright for what had happened, too calm for what I'd done. My phone buzzed messages, missed calls, notifications. The story had spread overnight. People were calling it the $2,200 lesson. Some praised it. Some called it petty. But none of them knew the years that led to that receipt. None of them understood how much cheaper revenge feels than being forgotten. I made coffee in Mom's mug, the chipped one with faded flowers. Steam rose quietly, filling the kitchen with the smell of comfort and memory. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty either. Just empty. There's a kind of silence that follows justice, not peace. Exactly. But the absence of noise. I sat by the window, watching rain clouds drift across the skyline. The world looked the same, like it hadn't even noticed something inside me had shifted forever. On the counter, last night's receipt lay drying beside the mug. The ink had bled slightly from the rain, but the words were still visible. "This one's on me." I traced the letters with my thumb. I wasn't sure if I'd written them for them or for me. Later that day, I took a walk. The city was quieter than usual, or maybe I was. The restaurant was still there, glowing gold in the gray afternoon. Through the window, I saw a different family, 2 parents, 2 kids, laughing, messy, alive. I couldn't look away. For a moment, I wondered what it would have been like if things had gone differently, if my mother were still alive, if my father had stayed kind, if love hadn't become a ledger. But life doesn't refund what you didn't spend wisely. You just learn to live without change. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a notebook. It had been years since I'd written anything that wasn't a work plan or a grocery list, but words started to come anyway, raw, clumsy, but real. There are 2 kinds of family, I wrote, those who feed your heart and those who starve it. Sometimes, blood doesn't make you related. It makes you indebted. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is pay the bill and walk away. I watched the city lights flicker on, one by one, each one a tiny story I'd never know. Maybe that's what growing up really is, realizing you're not part of every story, just your own. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, like air after a storm. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. It was the waiter, the same one from that night. He looked nervous, holding a white envelope. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," he said, "but the manager asked me to deliver this." I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "We see hundreds of people every week. Few leave a mark. But what you did reminded everyone, kindness can be sharper than anger. Thank you for reminding us what dignity looks like." And taped beside it was my receipt, the original one, laminated now. I stared at it for a long time, then laughed quietly. It wasn't pride. It wasn't nostalgia. It was recognition. That for once, my actions had spoken louder than their silence. I placed the receipt inside my mother's mug, next to Dad's old letter. They didn't belong together, but somehow they did. They were the beginning and end of the same lesson. The following Sunday, I cooked, for the first time in years, caramelized pork and boiled eggs just like she used to make. No guests, No family, just me, and the hum of the stove. I ate at the small wooden table by the window, one chair, one plate, one piece. When I was done, I poured a glass of wine, the same brand they drank that night. It didn't taste bitter anymore. "Here's to family," I whispered, "the kind you choose." I raised the glass toward the empty chair across from me, not out of sadness, but gratitude, because some absences are better than false presences. That night, before bed, I wrote one last line in my notebook. I bought peace tonight, and it only cost $200. Then I turned off the light, and for the first time in years, I slept without dreams. 2 days later, the story left the restaurant and hit the internet. It started as a quiet post on a local page. A man paid the full $2,200 bill for a family who refused to let him sit with them. At first, it was just another curiosity, another headline in the endless scroll. But then the photo surfaced the note, perfectly centered on a silver tray beside an untouched slice of cake. "This one's on me. After all, I'm not family, just the one who paid for it." Within hours, it spread everywhere. People shared it, debated it, rewrote it into threads, poems, podcasts. Some called it petty, others called it poetic, but no one called it wrong. By evening, the restaurant's PR manager released a statement confirming the story. He paid without hesitation, without anger, just calm dignity. Sometimes silence teaches louder than words. The post had 3 million likes by midnight. I sat at home, reading comments that didn't know my name. People invented details calling me the forgotten son, the quiet architect, the gentleman avenger. It was surreal, watching strangers interpret a story that was mine, yet no longer mine. But the strangest part, I didn't feel exposed. I felt invisible in the best way, seen through the act, not the face. My phone buzzed again. Unknown numbers, missed calls, then one message. "Dad, we need to talk." I didn't reply, because what was left to say? The next morning, I went for a walk downtown. The city had changed, or maybe I had. I passed a cafe where 2 college students were arguing over the story. "It's too dramatic," one said. "No," the other replied. "It's perfect. He didn't yell, didn't fight. He just let the truth pay for itself." I smiled faintly. That was enough. By the end of the week, every news outlet had covered it. Even the local radio ran a segment titled, "The $2,200 Receipt Heard Around the World." The host's voice was soft, almost reverent. Sometimes, revenge doesn't have to be cruel. Sometimes it's just holding up a mirror and letting people see themselves. I received a letter that same day. No name on the envelope, just a shaky handwriting I recognized instantly. "You humiliated me. It began. In front of everyone. You could have talked to me like a man. Instead, you made a spectacle. I didn't deserve that." I read it twice before folding it carefully. No anger, no satisfaction, just understanding. "You're right," I murmured. "You didn't deserve that. You deserve the truth." That weekend, I went back to the restaurant. The same waiter greeted me at the door, a mix of surprise and admiration in his eyes. "Welcome back, sir. Didn't think I'd see you again," he admitted. Neither did I. He led me to my old table, not the family one, not the shadowed one, a new one by the window. He smiled. "This one's just for you." I ordered coffee, nothing fancy. The rain began again outside, tapping the glass softly like an old rhythm. When he brought the cup, I noticed something engraved into the saucer, tiny words in silver, "Reserved for those who remember who they are." I looked up at him, surprised. He grinned. "Manager's idea, inspired by you." I laughed, shaking my head. "Tell him thank you, but I didn't do much." "That's not what the world thinks," he said gently. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about that the world, perception, narrative. We spend our lives wanting to be understood, but sometimes peace comes from being misunderstood beautifully. I didn't want to correct anyone, didn't want to explain the years behind that note. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. I looked across the room. At another table, a young man was arguing with his father, angry, loud, frustrated. The father rolled his eyes, muttering, "You're too sensitive." I wanted to tell him to be careful, that sons remember every word fathers pretend not to mean, but I didn't. I just paid for their meal on the way out, quietly, like symmetry. The rain had stopped by the time I stepped outside. The air was cool, almost forgiving. I pulled my jacket tighter, breathing in the city's pulse-honking cars, wet pavement, life moving on. A woman passed by, holding a newspaper. I caught a glimpse of the headline before she disappeared into the crowd. Family Table story sparks conversations on dignity and class. It felt distant, like a ghost of my own life walking beside me. That night, I opened my laptop. I typed for hours, not for work, not for anyone, just the truth, stripped of names and timelines. Revenge doesn't fix the past, I wrote. It rewrites the ending. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's the final word. When I finally stopped typing, it was midnight. Outside, the city glowed like an apology. I leaned back, stared at the screen, and whispered to no one. They finally saved me a seat in their shame. Then I smiled, because peace, I realized, doesn't come from being right. It comes from being done. A month later, the story had already faded from the news cycle. The world had moved on, as it always does. But I hadn't, not because I was still angry, but because I was finally calm. I moved apartments, nothing fancy, just smaller, quieter, a corner place overlooking the park. In the mornings, I could hear kids laughing, dogs barking, life continuing simple, honest sounds. I started cooking again, caramelized pork, boiled eggs, the same meal my mother used to make when the world felt too loud. I used to think cooking for one was sad. Now it felt sacred. Sometimes I'd pass that restaurant on my way home. Through the glass, I'd see strangers sitting at the same table, different faces, same laughter, and I'd smile, because it wasn't my story anymore. The table wasn't cursed. It just belonged to people who hadn't learned yet. One afternoon, as I was reading at a cafe, the waiter from that night walked in. He recognized me instantly, smiling shyly. "You're kinda famous, you know." I laughed. Not really. "They talk about you, customers, staff, even the owner. You changed the place." "How?" He shrugged. "People tip better now. They're nicer. They think twice before saying, 'This table's for family.'" I smiled. "Good. Maybe that's enough." When he left, I sat there for a long time, thinking about that word family, how heavy it once felt, how light it was now. Maybe family isn't a birthright. Maybe it's a place you build from the quiet pieces of yourself that survived everyone else. That night, I wrote again. I used to want a seat at their table. Now I'm building one of my own, smaller, quieter, honest. If love is currency, I've stopped spending where it's not accepted. And if family is where you feel unwanted, maybe it's time to start cooking alone. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just 2 words on the envelope. "I'm sorry." Inside was my father's handwriting. "You were right. I forgot what mattered. Mom would have hated what we became." No signature, just that. I folded it slowly, then smiled. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't need a reply. That weekend, I invited a few neighbors for dinner. Nothing fancy, just home-cooked food and laughter. A single candle in the middle of the table. The sound of plates. Stories. and second chances. As one of them reached for more rice, she smiled. "You're a good host." "Thanks," I said. "I used to think I wasn't invited anywhere." "You are now." I looked around the table, not perfect, not blood, not history, but home. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt full. Later that night, after everyone left, I washed the dishes in silence. The apartment smelled like garlic, rain, and peace. I looked at the empty table, still warm from touch. "Not bad," I whispered to the air. "Not bad at all." Then I took a pen and scribbled one last line in my notebook. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "You can rest now." If you've ever been excluded by people who should have loved you most, remember this. You don't owe them a seat at your peace. Build your own table. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply eating alone and smiling.